I just have a pit in my stomach and I just need to talk about it. The American healthcare system sucks, and recent events have kind of put a massive spotlight on it, and I just want to help it shine more. It's Sage, and I wanted to cover the recent case involving the United Healthcare CEO. First, I want to make it clear everything I say is alleged, say it with me in the back, alleged. Because remember, a big part of being in good old America is that you are, say it with me, innocent until proven guilty. And the alleged suspect recently just pleaded. There are a lot of sources out there that go really deep into the background of this case, but I just want to give you a Cliff Notes version of the situation. On a New York City street, a person took the life of United Healthcare's CEO. 3 bullet casings were found that had engraved deny, defend, and depose. This refers to the horrific cycle the healthcare system puts its customers through when the company doesn't want to foot the bill for their customers' needed care. The suspect fled on an e-bike, and a multi-day manhunt began. A backpack they believed to be the suspect's was found filled with Monopoly money and a jacket, which is just such a statement in itself. And of course, once news broke, New Yorkers did what they do best, and chaos ensued. They began holding look-alike competitions of the suspect in hopes of making it harder to catch him, and they posted wanted flyers of other healthcare CEOs. About 5 days after the incident, a person called in to report the suspect in a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. This is where a man named Luigi Mangione sat nibbling on some hash browns. He was questioned, arrested, and charged with the New York City incident. I have my own theories of if Luigi's even the suspect, or if he is, whether or not he was trying to get caught, but there's just so many directions it can go, and it's just so much speculation. Instead, I'll jump straight into the ridiculous statements being made in the media. A big one is people are just supporting him because he's attractive. Although I do agree this can be true for some people, many people were in support of Luigi before we even knew what he looked like. That was the whole reason the lookalike competitions even took place. In this New York Times article, they even state Luigi Mangione, the online version of him, was an Ivy League tech enthusiast who flaunted his tanned, chiseled looks in beach photos and past pictures with blue blazered frat buddies. And it's almost comical at the way they try to paint him as this entitled frat boy. It's like they're just trying to reach for anything they can. The problem for the media is that Luigi is white, educated, well off, and so far has a socially clean record. Rather than the media being able to cling on to something like the person being a part of the LGBTQ, being a person of color, or coming from poverty, or being mentally unstable, to try to morph a type of story about this type of heinous person, they don't really have that. So what do? Instead? They have to twist so many other aspects of this case just to try so hard to paint this man in the worst light they can, which you can tell they're struggling if the worst things they can come up with is you only like him because he's hot, and look, he's just a spoiled frat bro. Another example of this is the manifesto Luigi allegedly had on him when he was found at McD's. Multiple media sources were given this manifesto, yet big media spaces decided to only showcase one main phrase from that. And you want to know what it was? These parasites had it coming. It wasn't until Ken Klippenstein released the full manifesto and called out these larger media companies that the public were able to see the full story. The thought that huge media outlets had access to this full document but decided to focus on 5 words out of a over 250-word document really says it all. They are massively biased in trying to paint the situation in a very specific light. Here's the whole manifesto if you're interested. To the feds, I'll keep this short because I respect what you do for our country. To save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial. Some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, and a lot of patience. The spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and a to-do list that illuminates the gist of it. My tech is pretty locked down because I work in engineering, so probably not much info there. I do apologize for any strife of traumas, but it had to be done. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. A reminder, the US has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly 42 in life expectancy. United is the indecipherable largest company in the US by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, and Walmart. It has grown and grown, but has our life expectancy? No, the reality is these indecipherable have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, the problem is more complex, but I do not have space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument. But many have illuminated the corruption and greed, Rosenthal and more, decades ago, and the problem simply remains. It is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. Evidently, I'm the first to face it with such brutal honesty. It's crazy those were the only 5 words that they wanted to show. I wonder why. Then, when Luigi was being escorted on December 10th, this happened.
And completely out of touch and insult the intelligence of the American people.
If you have a hard time hearing him, it sounds like he said, "This is extremely unjust and it's an insult to the American people and their lived experience." And because I don't want to get taken down by CNN for showing too much of their video, I'll summarize a portion of what came directly after what you just saw. But an attorney comes on and refers to Luigi's statements that you just heard as a disturbing outburst, and describes the manifesto as rantings and ravings of abhorrent thoughts, along with questioning if he's even an individual that will be able to understand what he's even being charged with. And honestly, after initially watching that segment, I was just completely flabbergasted with how backwards everything felt. I felt like I must be the outlier, because to me, his reasoning seemed pretty obvious, and he doesn't seem to be incoherent or mentally unstable. I mean, he was literally getting thrown against a wall and pushed around while still being able to state what he meant pretty well. It especially got me when they claimed his statements were disturbing, when the whole system he's fighting against is the actual disturbing healthcare situations Americans are suffering through. I really could not understand where these people were coming from for the media, but then I scrolled to the comments, and to be honest, if you scroll to the comments of almost any video like this, you'll get the actual people's opinions, because seriously, I haven't seen this much of a disconnect in what the media is trying to say and paint versus what people actually feel in a while. Here, they even have the thumbnail making him seem so aggressive, while really, the police are the ones shoving him against the wall and pushing him around, which seems way more aggressive. The bias is just so obvious. This is what the people actually say. It's not right for someone to decide who lives and dies, and yet that's essentially what healthcare insurance industry does every single day. This type of outburst is disturbing. The media. Our healthcare system is killing us in masses. The American public. So a man is dragged by the neck into a jail shouting that the ruling class doesn't respect its citizens nor their intelligence, and the way the news reacts is, golly, how disturbing is that, right? He's yelling. That's so scary. Like, come on, guys, get real. Sorry, CNN, we're not buying how you're trying to portray him. He's not our enemy. And I think that's a really good point. I feel like a lot of standard Americans would actually be less afraid of him than some of the people within our predatory healthcare industry. The media is trying so hard not to talk about healthcare claims being denied. Talk about the real problems. Thank you, yes. His outburst is disturbing. You know what's really disturbing? The CEO of corporations making tens of millions of dollars a year profiting off of sick, dying, scared, vulnerable Americans, while simultaneously denying 33% of people paying for that insurance. Absolutely pure greed and evil. I want to hear everything he has to say, and I feel there's a reason we're not getting to. It's crazy the disconnect in what the media is trying to spin versus what the public actually thinks. About a week ago, there was the almost comical perp walk done in New York. I think this was a spectacle to try and signal that his actions aren't acceptable, but if anything, I think this type of spectacle might actually do the exact opposite, and people might view him more as a martyr from this. Or like some people pointed out, it's similar to this scene, and I do think a lot of people are viewing it more under that context. Even the New York City mayor commented, "I want to look him in the eye and state, you carried out this terroristic act in my city, the city that the people of New York love. I wanted to be there to show the symbolism of that." The issue is that, as a mayor, you really aren't supposed to say things like that, especially if you're not dousing it with a big dose of alleged or allegedly throughout your whole statement. Like, you're just complicating things more. While being surrounded by way more than necessary officers, even Luigi's lawyer, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, dug into the judge about the mayor's statements and in general of how unfair Luigi's treatment has been so far. Full video linked below. At this point, Luigi is not only being charged for the slaying of the CEO, but he also has terrorism charges. Personally, if anything in this case has terroristic-like tendencies, I'd be leaning more towards the torturous healthcare industry currently going down the drain, but that's just me. I really do wonder if this could be one of those cases where jury nullification could be possible. Jury nullification can happen when, even though the jury members know a crime has been committed, they still vote against the facts because they are personally okay with the actions. And I think a lot of people that have dealt with the health insurance industry have a lot of personal horror stories that might sway people away from a guilty vote, even if the evidence might say otherwise. I personally think it'll be really hard to get a jury of people that are okay with today's state of American healthcare, so I'm really interested in seeing how this plays out in the court system. Now, Based on everything I've covered so far, you can probably tell the media has mostly tried to avoid talking about certain topics. Well, I don't want to, so let's discuss the actual root of the whole issue: healthcare! Just to clarify, when I mention United, I'm referring to United Healthcare. Just covering my butt. Don't come for me, United Airlines. First, let's talk about some statistics. They're pretty bad. First, talking about one that is directly related to the case: 69% of Americans believe denials for healthcare coverage by health insurance companies had a great deal or a moderate amount of responsibility for the recent CEO slaying. So if you're originally feeling alone in your opinion because of how things are being portrayed in the media, realize a lot more people than you probably think feel very similarly to you. Ken Klippenstein has a good article on this table I have linked below if you're interested. Now, let's talk a little more generally about health insurance. About 4 in 10 adults reported having debt due to medical or dental bills. About half of the adults that are actually insured worry about affording their monthly health insurance premiums. And then about 3 in 4 adults say they are either very or somewhat worried about being able to afford unexpected medical bills or the cost of health services for themselves or their family. Additionally, about half of the adults would be unable to pay an unexpected medical bill of $500 in full without going into debt. And what do we have to thank for this? Our good old American healthcare industry, where United Healthcare gets the stamp of being one of the worst healthcare providers you can get in the US, but their parent company, United Health Group, gets to rake it in by being currently worth nearly $500 billion. That's with a fucking T. On top of that, United implemented usage of AI tools to cut costs. You want to know how great that tool works? It had a 90% error rate. This was known by the company, which is a big reason United is currently in a lawsuit. This AI system would override input from the real-life doctors and deny even when the doctor deems the expense was medically necessary. Now that we have some of the statistics and data, let's try to think about more of the perspective of both sides in this case, both CEO and suspect. First, I want to make something very clear so I'm not put on a list or anything. Do I condone what happened to the CEO? No. Am I surprised it happened? Also no. You can only reign terror over a community so much before someone is fed up and fights back. What do you think the health insurance industry has been doing to so many Americans for decades? But before I get ahead of myself, I want us to test our ability to try and put ourselves in someone else's shoes. First, we're gonna put on our CEO shoes. They're nice, cozy, and just as expensive as your whole peasant wardrobe. You, as a health insurance CEO, are potentially able to delude yourself into believing that you're actually doing good to the people you provide a service to. Or maybe, just maybe, you understand the reality that the only reason you're able to get you and your stakeholders' pockets lined more and more is directly by denying care for people that need it and are paying for it. I feel like I personally would do a lot to feel more comfortable financially in life, but the thought of selling my soul to the insurance industry and actively participating in a torturous system that burns so many people, I don't think I could do it. Some people might be able to justify it through their need to support their family and a desired lifestyle. I personally don't think I would be able to live with myself. I would have so much mental turmoil around my job, I probably wouldn't even be able to sleep at night. In this specific case, remember, you'd also be being actively investigated for insider trading and have been previously arrested for a DUI. Now, let's toss those shoes off and put on our alleged suspect shoes if it does happen to be Luigi. Because remember, these shoes are big and brown. I had to. Just think, you actively walked away from what was a life of unimaginable wealth to a lot of standard Americans out there to make a point about the predatory and torturous healthcare system. You could have just played your part and become a part of the system that was built around you. You even likely could have become one of those millionaire CEOs with the wealth, education, and connections you had, but instead, you actively chose a different path. Your family had millions through the retirement homes and country clubs they owned. Imagine the potential you gave up to make a stand on your principles. The other part that isn't often talked about is, although you're rich, it still isn't enough to help you with your chronic back pain. So bad that you can't be intimate as a young man in your prime, and so bad that you have to be bedridden and have extreme surgeries that still do not fix the issue. Even as one of the wealthy, the US healthcare system still fails you and many of the less fortunate Americans around you. Just imagine how much physical and mental turmoil you must have to go through to be willing to give that kind of life up and commit such a heinous act to make a point. A life so many people would have wished to have been born into. Now, let's take off our Luigi shoes and speak more generally and personally. If you are someone that has dealt with or seen a family member deal with the torturous healthcare system, you likely have similar feelings of anger, frustration, or sadly, maybe even despair. Our whole healthcare system has been draining us and has been getting worse longer than I've been alive. And if you haven't dealt with anything negative yet, honestly, just count your blessings because it's only a matter of time until you do. I remember as a kid asking why health insurance has to be tied to a job. It just never made sense, but I was told it's just the way it works. Later on in life, I watched multiple relatives go into massive debt over health issues they had no control over. I even watched one of my grandparents pass way earlier than they should have because things weren't able to get covered and approved fast enough through insurance. Later on, I started my own business and started to be fearful because healthcare is even less affordable if you're a small business owner. Because of course, that's how the system works. For years, I've had to watch a close relative spend many hours weekly, in some cases over 10 hours on the phone, calling doctors, insurance companies, medicine providers, and other entities to try and make sure they get the care they need and it will be covered. A lot of the times resulting in tears and despair because the professionals often don't have straightforward answers and end up sending you to another representative to sit on hold with. This relative at least has the ability to be on the phone between standard work hours. What about the other Americans out there that have a standard 9-to-5 job? You wouldn't even have the ability for time or probably even the mental energy to handle situations like that. Then, within the last few years, I watched a beloved grandparent, while at the end of their life, having to spend down their entire life savings so they could get the help they desperately needed in a care home. Everything is just so skewed against the American people, and that brings me to now. I haven't been as scorned as many of the people in my family or some of the horror stories I've seen online, but I'm at the point that I likely won't have health coverage next year. And I just have so much frustration towards the industry and its existence as a whole. This is why I wanted to avoid this kind of topic, but it's weighed really heavy. And I feel like I just have a pit in my stomach since last month, and I just need to talk about it. This whole situation has just really put a spotlight on some of the massive inequalities for Americans. When a huge corporation allows so many deaths, it's just a cost of doing business. But when one of them are attacked, it gets this much coverage, attention, and resources. Please remember this, and remember who they actually care about, because it isn't you and I. Actually, everyday people like you and I get charged with terrorism instead for showing just a thread of frustration at the current system we're in. What's frustrating is if someone said something way more directly of a threat than "you people are next" to some American on the street, you'd likely be met with a "we'll make a report on that," and guess what? Never hear anything about it ever again. The healthcare industry is a conversation that is constantly distracted from by so many other us versus them type of issues in the United States. We are constantly as a nation pointed away from addressing class inequality and the current state of our torturous healthcare system. Our system needs massive reform to better protect the American people, and I can only hope the recent events can be some type of catalyst to some change we might see coming. So far, this incident has at least made a massive spotlight on the insurance industry and has allowed a lot of those scorned by it to be able to have a platform to vent their experience and grievances. In my opinion, we've already seen a tiny amount of progress since Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield had some pretty disgusting plans they were going to roll out in 2025. In this new plan, they were only going to cover a portion of your anesthesia if your surgery went longer than what they deemed necessary. Then they claimed to have rolled back this decision because there was a lot of misinformation spread online. Or maybe it has to do with the recent events because they literally announced the rollback the day after the incident. I'm absolutely concerned about how these events can lead to copycats and just more chaos in our future, but I hope we can actually make progress for our healthcare system and the American people. So many people mention violence is not the answer, yet when people try to do things the right way or the peaceful way, this happens. Or this, do I need to go on? I'll end it with a quote for today by John F. Kennedy. "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." It's sad that this was stated over 60 years ago. And what's changed? Do we as people live better lives today? I'll leave that up for you to decide. I'll see you guys next time with a more lighthearted topic. Take care and bye.